I thought I'd come on here and talk about the HEA briefing and the opening for Georgia Tech. I wrote up a blog article the other day, wanted to now put a video behind it and audio to talk about what the profile of the position could be and why that directs what the candidates might look like. And just for fun, really trying to practice my analysis on what the candidates could look like out there for a job like this. So I've done this for the USF, and I'll probably do one for Marshall too, and any other openings that do come up. So I've got these HEA briefings that is basically a political landscape of the institution, the governance system, the politics, city, county, state, all those types of things. So if you're interested in that, go to higheredathletics.com, and it's under the HEA briefings. There's one for Georgia Tech as well as Marshall and USF so far. In the blog post, I mentioned that Parker Executive Search is who I thought would get this search. And then 2 days after I wrote that, it now shows on Parker's website that they are the Georgia Tech search firm being used for this position. And the reason I thought that is President Cabrera used them for the last search, but also going back to when he was the president of George Mason, he used that whenever his AD had retired. So there's an established relationship there and a trust. And what I thought was interesting is President Cabrera did say the interest for this position is extremely, extremely high. This is going to be more of a question of deciding what is the right profile for this point of time for Georgia Tech. And so that made me curious about what the profile actually is. And this is in a Atlanta-based article. And my assumption is this narrows the field to a sitting FBS AD, but the success of Jay Batt could lessen the risk of going with a Power 4 deputy AD being hired, similar to how he was hired from Alabama. And so I put some thoughts out here on what my home run hire would look like, the internal hires, what I thought they would look like, a group of five sitting AD hire, and then external Power 4 deputy AD hires. Then another outlier, pro sports executive hire. And then I end it with my prediction. Just once again, just for fun, just trying out something new for some analysis as I start to kind of put my own voice out there behind studying. I don't just name these names because they're popular. I try to fit the profile. I think a home run hire is also the least likely to happen. Everyone probably assumes the home run hire would be Graham Neff. That's what I would think of. He's the Clemson AD. He's a double alum of Georgia Tech. And the president's a Georgia Tech alum. I'm sure he'd love to have an alum leading the athletic department, especially kind of someone that's seen as a young rising star as an AD already at a power school. So Graham Neff has been the AD since 2021, December 2021, but he's been at Clemson since 2013 in senior level roles. And so whenever their previous AD left for Miami, he went from deputy to land the head athletic director position. And it being an ACC school probably makes it more comfortable of a decision because you already know the peers. It's kind of like when Ross Bjork went from one SEC school to another SEC school. So I imagine there's at least familiarity. You know the league. And I think right now in college athletics, that's incredibly important to know the league of all the people that you've been talking about and having your same commissioner leading you. And that's just an important thing. But Clemson is a stronger brand. So leaving for Georgia Tech would have to be a going home type of decision for him and his family. And I don't know that he leaves because of another silly reason, but maybe just me reading the tea leaves here. I saw a quote in D1 Ticker from a Yahoo Sports article where he was providing an example about NIL reach with a school in the same market. And Neff said, the reach of Georgia Tech in Atlanta is different than the reach of Georgia State. Now, that's probably just a quick and practical example of a place he's familiar with, because if he was involved in the AD search at Georgia Tech, I really don't think at this time he would slip an example mentioning Georgia Tech for a reporter. And, that was after the job came open. So it seems like Graham Neff is probably the name on the short list that Georgia Tech would want, but my guess is he's not going to leave Clemson. So I think if it's not the home run hire, the next step you go to is there going to be an internal hire. Right now, John Palumbo is the executive deputy AD and COO, but right now he's serving as the interim. For those that are familiar, he came from one of those sitting AD roles to become a deputy at a power school. He did that because he was the AD at Texas A&M Corpus Christi for 4 years. He has a previous background in power schools and FBS schools. He checks the box of previous AD experience if that is important. I mean, he's been the COO for years with BAT, so he's got a good grip on the athletic department. And right now, changes, you might want someone that kind of has that steady hand, and that might be something that helps Palumbo look to retain this position. And so if he doesn't, I do wonder if he will leave to go to Michigan State with Bat. The two work together at Maryland, and Bat doesn't really have someone, as far as I know, that is kind of a trusted deputy at Michigan State. Now, a lot of times someone would want to bring someone with them. So that could be that person if Palumbo doesn't get the job, but still getting to serve in this interim role at a place like Georgia Tech. That can be incredible experience. But if not, it will be interesting to see if he leaves for Michigan State. Now, the other internal name I'd look for at Georgia Tech would be Jim Hall. So he's the current VP for development at Georgia Tech. He's been a huge part of Georgia Tech fundraising for the institution and in the athletic department. He previously worked in the athletic department, held the title of Executive Associate AD at Georgia Tech Athletics. He's been there since 1998. He's only been the VP since January 20 of this year, 2025. So it wouldn't surprise me if you see President Cabrera look inside his current cabinet to find his next permanent AD. Now, the one thing that might sound like not a big deal, but do you really want to then go have to find another VP of development? So the idea might be, hey, we can go with someone else because we have such a strong presence as the VP of development that can help this new athletic director. Jay Batt was definitely a fundraiser. He was an external person. Does that give you the flexibility now to maybe not have to have a person like that because you might want someone else to fit the direction that the athletic department's going? And that leads me to my next kind of group of a type of candidate. I really think an existing group of five AD could be the hire here. And I think there's two that stand out to me that make good sense for Georgia Tech. They're both named Brian. Brian Blair at Toledo and Brian White at FAU. So Brian Blair's been the AD at Toledo since 2022. He's got an outgoing personality. He's creative with his department. Seems to have incredible communication skills with his school, the fan base, and the local media like the Toledo Blade. Pat Chun gave him a great deal of responsibility when he was at Washington State that I think really helped him get the Toledo job. He spearheaded the strategic plan there. His law background and coming up from compliance, it could be invaluable right now in navigating the uncertainty. And I think it's only a matter of time until Blair becomes a P4 AD, and the timing might be right. Toledo is onboarding a new president right now. It's not the interim that Blair has had for a long time. So Atlanta would cut the distance in half from his hometown in South Carolina. So is this another decision that if opportunity presents itself after 3 years in Toledo, do you then try to make the jump to a job like this? The other Brian White, he's been the FAU AD since 2018. That kind of makes me wonder, does he just want to stay there? I used to work at Nova Southeastern, about 20 minutes from FAU. Boca Raton is absolutely beautiful. The campus is beautiful. It's got to be a hard place to move away, especially convincing your family to move away. The other thing, he just signed a contract extension in 2024. So one of the things I look for in a prediction, though, is was there a president change or another major change since the AD was hired or extended? FAU just hired a new president earlier this year. It's a former state legislator in Florida, Adam Hasner. This is the third president that White has had since his arrival in 2018. Maybe he's looking for some stability from a boss that he would get that in Georgia Tech because Angel Cabrera has been the president there for several years. He's only halfway through the strategic plan. White clearly has the industry experience for the job. He's led his own department for 7 years. He's continuously breaking fundraising records at FAU, but he's also had senior level roles at Missouri and Army and other places. And yes, he has that family name, the family wisdom with his dad, Dr. Kevin White, and his brother, Dr. Danny White. Now, what I think is interesting here is the timing. Yes, he's been there for a while at FAU, but Danny had been an AD at the G5 level between Buffalo and UCF for about the same amount of time now as Brian's been at FAU before becoming the AD at Tennessee. So, does this all kind of piece together where Brian White makes sense? The next type, external power forward deputy AD hire. Jay Batt was a top deputy at Alabama when he surfaced as the AD selection, and it worked then. Maybe it can go with the same playbook. Now, the interesting thing is we don't know what the playbook looks like because we don't know what the job profile is, going back to President Cabrera's quote at the beginning of this video. The environment's changed a bit with the House settlement now and new revenue streams being necessary, but it is possible a Power 4 deputy is hired again. It would be impossible to name the top one, so I'm going to focus my attention on one that makes sense. And I think that is Tiffany Grimes. She's the deputy AD at Purdue, and she works with Mike Babinski, who came to Purdue after serving as the Georgia Tech AD from 2013 to 2016. Grimes worked at Alabama from 16 to 22 as the senior deputy AD, and that means she worked with Jay Batt for about 5 years at Alabama. And then I originally thought Grimes left Alabama for Purdue in 2022 because I live in Indiana. Kind of the thought was that Babinski might be looking for a successor, might retire whenever President Daniels was on his way out. But the other thing is Grimes is a Purdue alum, so maybe she just wanted to get back there. But if Babinski was thinking of retiring, then it would make sense that trying to get Tiffany Grimes, who is a Purdue alum. And so that just makes sense to leave Alabama and go to Purdue to be the deputy. It kind of was seen as like just it lined up like this successor move. And what's interesting and kind of throws a wrench on this is Babinski signed a contract extension through June of 2028. So maybe Grimes now is looking for an AD position and then maybe one day come back to Purdue. If so, I think the connection to Georgia Tech with Babinski and Batt could help her with credibility to the Georgia Tech Search Committee and the Georgia Tech Athletic Association trustees. And she doesn't appear to have fundraising experience, but keep in mind that Batt kicked off the fundraising and VP of Development Jim Hall would be there to help the next AD, as I mentioned. Now, she does have a strong background administrating football and men's basketball at Alabama. And I don't think some people realize that this is important, but Georgia Tech lists Purdue as an institutional peer. A lot of people that are trustees of the GTAA are administrators and faculty at Georgia Tech. So I do think it's something that you have to consider. Now, the other type of candidate, the pro sports executive hire. So this kind of made waves, but 2 weeks before Batt was announced to be leaving for Michigan State, Maryland selected their new AD, James Smith, from the Atlanta Braves. So will Georgia Tech follow a similar path and find another pro sports executive as their AD? And it's harder to find public information on pro sports executives. And it's not as simple as how we think of just Googling any college athletic department staff directory. But it seems Smith was probably the most likely Atlanta-based sports executive to go back to college. It does make you wonder if James Smith would have been interested in the Georgia Tech opening, as most of his career was in Atlanta sports with the MLB's Braves, the NFL's Falcons, and the Major League Soccer's Atlanta United. He also had a huge part in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium construction. If so, that is just some bad timing. And I assume, we've seen AD last year or 2 years ago go from one school to the next in really quick fashion. But I don't know that that's going to happen here. And the timing probably just too tight. But I wouldn't be surprised in Atlanta if an up-and-coming sports or TV executive becomes the next AD at Georgia Tech. Downtown Atlanta is saturated with sports teams and networks. If anyone's driven through there, you know that. So my prediction alert. Like I said, I try to just cover the topic, the categories of who I think could be based on whichever direction the profile comes out. So that's why I think it'll be interesting. Predictions are new to me. I figured I'd lay out my thought process above. I'd put it in the article, and then I'd end it with a prediction to see if it at least had the candidate type or the position profile, not necessarily the name. That's really hard to guess. And if we weren't so used in this industry of names being floated out there by journalists, I wouldn't put names. My names, it doesn't matter. I have no sources on this. This is just me thinking from studying ADs. So if I offend anyone by including you or not including you, I apologize, but there is no information that I've gone out and gotten by speaking to sources or anything. I'm not a journalist. I'm just studying this. So these are all based on my observations and the frameworks of thought that I put in this. So without knowing what President Cabrera is looking for in this position, it is difficult to predict who exactly they hire. But if I were to make an educated guess, I'd say going with a sitting G5 athletic director would be the way he's going to go. And within that framework, I think it's going to be Brian Blair as the next AD at Georgia Tech.